A large security detail of the Royal Earth Guard inspected their carriage at the gate of the Imperial Ministry of Magic. In addition to their well-maintained suits of minor and lesser magical equipment, they employed various magic items. A wing of hippogriffs cast their shadows from overhead as several spells and magic items were employed to inspect the vehicle and its occupants. As Ludmilla watched them work, one of the knights holding an unknown device looked up at her. She held his gaze for several moments before he nervously turned away. Annoyed, Ludmilla used her skill to gauge his disposition as he went over to speak with his captain. He was darker than he should have been. Her annoyance grew as the two soldiers glanced furtively in the direction of the carriage and the captain darkened as well. They're doing it again. Doing what again? Ludmilla glanced at Florine. Little trace of her friend's sour mood from the previous day remained and she was beginning to behave normally again. As for herself, there was little she could do that wouldn't run afoul of infringing on the Empire's autonomy as a protectorate of the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Letting us through unchallenged after detecting an anomaly. That knight over there realized that the magic item he was using wasn't working on me. Instead of investigating the issue, both he and his captain are looking the other way. The First Legion's checkpoints had done so since their arrival in our winter, though Ludmilla had only caught on to their behavior sometime during the third day of their visit. Every checkpoint had magic casters and used magic items to inspect vehicles and their contents, but Ludmilla's ring of non-detection would foil all of their attempts at gathering information with magic, special skills, or supernatural abilities. This would not be recognized as strange for some of them, but plainly out of place for others. Can you blame them? Yes. Florine's cheeks twitched as she suppressed a smile. I admire your steadfast character, but you can't impose your values on Imperial citizens. Technically we could, but our big sisters here don't want us to. Ludmilla's attention drifted over to Liane. Would you do it if we hadn't said otherwise? Of course not. That's exactly my point. We are entrusted with authority as representatives of a higher order and wield it responsibly. These knights are entrusted with the security of the Baharuth Empire, yet so readily shirk their duties. First Legion or not, they're still those little people who don't want to get squished if they can help it. Even other nobles would have a hard time. Very few people enjoy the close support that our little group shares. We're like some weird, unheard of exception, well, except you. You just do your thing until you get killed for it. She rolled her eyes at Liane's response. There are considerations that they must make on behalf of the Empire, as well. Even though we aren't exercising our authority, the order that we serve still legally supersedes theirs. Combined with their views on the Sorceress Kingdom, well, think of how people measure others at a glance in this country. Noyer is never challenged in public spaces by people beneath her station. People's heads go straight to the ground when Frianne shows her face. Depending on the circumstances we can potentially be higher than the Emperor, and because Imperial citizens think the way that they do, they'll be erring on the side of caution. Florine's interpretation was sound, but Ludmilla was no less annoyed. It was one thing to be discreet and flexible, it was another to create gaping holes in security and ignore bureaucratic processes put in place to maintain order. She wondered how much of the Empire's proceedings would be considered corrupt in the Sorcerer's Kingdom. I wonder why it is that erring on the side of caution always results in looking the other way when it comes to us. We've seen their behavior around other dignitaries wandering around the first-class district. Their vigilance doubles and they try to impress the authority and prestige of the Empire upon their guests. Has it not occurred to them that being unprofessional around us will only damage the Empire's reputation? Well, that's just how it is. Even Frianne struggles and she's had days to get used to us. A duke's daughter should represent the upper limit of their expected behavior. Anyone higher would be an exception beyond exceptions. Or they could be a cranky hard ass. The carriage doors opened. Liane hopped out before Ludmilla could shoot her a look. Ludmilla stepped out under the overcast skies. She waited until Clara, who hadn't commented on their discussion at all, disembarked before they headed into the grounds of the Imperial Ministry of Magic. Two iron golems stood on either side of the main building's entrance. They seemed infinitely more reliable than the human security forces, if only because they were mindless and would reliably attempt to carry out their orders. Between them stood two men. They were not adorned in the trappings of the Royal Earth Guard, instead wearing well-crafted robes. Various pouches and articles of unknown use dangled out from their belts as they lowered their heads. "Welcome, Lady Frianne," the grey-robed man on the left said. "It's been too long since your last visit." "It's good to see you again, Lord Frost," Lady Freyan smiled warmly. "Ah, they're totally into each other." Were they? It only seemed a friendly exchange to Ludmilla, but Leanne was probably much more sensitive to such things. "Lord Frost." The man seemed to taste the word, then shook his head. "Lord Frost. I still can't get used to that. I would rather you address me as you have in the past, Lady Freyan." "We are here in an unofficial capacity," Lady Freyan said, "but it would be better if it was treated as a semi-official occasion." "I see. One of those. Well, far be it from me to question the dynastic establishment." Lady Freyan stood to the side, gesturing to each of them in turn. "I have the pleasure of introducing you to Countess Clara Odelia Dale Corlin, Countess Leanne Loretta Dale Wagner, Baroness Ludmilla Zaradnik, and Baroness Florine Cadia Dale Gonye. As stated in our correspondence, they are nobles from the Sorceress Kingdom who have come to see our winter." Lord Frost observed them intently as they made their greetings. It wasn't the look of male attraction that was so often cast in their direction, it was closer to the face Leanne put on when studying her contraptions. Interesting, he continued to study them long after Lady Freyan finished speaking. "Nobles from the Sorceress Kingdom, yet there does not appear to be a single mage amongst you. What say you to this, Lady Freyan?" "They are former nobles of Riestais," Lady Freyan told him. "Their titles went along with the duchy." "I see. Well, reality often disappoints. Still, their panoply is impressive. Nobles of Riestais are not known for their appreciation of magic, so I can only assume that this is a result of changes brought about by the Sorceress Kingdom?" "You can tell?" Ludmilla asked. Lord Frost raised his arms in answer, exposing hands hidden under the long sleeves of his grey robe. He presented 2 items in either palm. "The fellows stationed at the perimeter possess certain shortfalls when it comes to magical security," Lord Frost said. "Their work is sufficient when dealing with the mundane and uninitiated, but we of the Ministry of Magic must take additional precautions by necessity." Lady Freyan glanced uncertainly between them. "Will there be any problems, Lord Frost?" "The problem is whether the problems are truly problems," Lord Frost replied, "and whether they are one sort of problem or another. The daughters of Northern descent are all equipped to such a degree that the combined armament of the entire Royal Earth Guard would be put to shame by a single one of them. This lady of southern lineage does not appear to have any magic items at all, which means that she is either the worst or best equipped. In various ways." "What ways might that be?" Clara asked. "My colleagues might notice and swarm you. That may work in your favor or against. Or both. I find it highly unlikely that Lady Zaradnik here is not wearing something at least as absurd as the rest of you, but this is only because the rest of you indicate that something is amiss. As such, it may result in some poking and prodding, a challenge for discerning individuals, if you will." A slow smile grew on Lord Frost's face. He gave them a thoughtful look. "This will be very interesting indeed," he said. "If you ladies are as strong as your items suggest, then the Empire shall face a great calamity should someone poke you in an unwelcome fashion. Come, Norman, let us witness the fate of our great nation." Lord Frost turned with a lazy wave of his hand, making his way deeper into the Imperial Ministry of Magic. The brown-robed man bobbed his head once before following in his wake. Lady Freyan frowned after them. "You'll have to forgive Lord Frost," she clicked her tongue. "He didn't even introduce himself. He is Baron Willem Daryl van Frost, one of the senior fellows of the Imperial Ministry of Magic. The man in the junior associate's robes is his apprentice, Norman Elig." "I think I like him," Leanne said. "Can I take him back with me, Freyan?" "No." Leanne grinned as Lady Freyan led them after Lord Frost. Though his grey-robed figure was nowhere to be seen, their guide led them through the empty corridors without a hint of hesitation. "You seem to know your way around," Ludmilla noted. "I came here to study twice a week when I was a student at the academy," Lady Freyan replied. "The Ministry of Magic was trying to recruit me since my first year and assigned Lord Frost as my tutor in arcane magic. I became capable of casting third-tier spells towards the end of my senior year, but I was too busy working on my treatise to pay their overtures any mind. Not that I would have joined, a position of authority on the court council has always been my goal." "You appear to be much happier here," Florine said. "And not just because of Lord Frost." "You're not wrong," Lady Freyan admitted, but the court council is where I am needed the most, especially for the people here. Most are much like the master, they care little for what goes on outside of their fields of study. Someone needs to represent them in the palace. Magic and magic casters need to be recognized as an integral part of imperial culture. At the moment, we are little more than well-compensated tools. During their time together, Lady Freyan was always more than happy to discuss the content of her treatise. In the hallways of the Imperial Ministry of Magic, her conviction on matters of arcane culture echoed clearly down the otherwise silent halls. It was the place where she truly belonged, and she championed its cause in the heart of imperial power. What sort of feedback have you received from the members of this ministry about your work? Clara asked. This cloistered setting makes for a good metaphor, Lady Freyan replied. The great minds of the ministry are somewhere between invisible and shunned by the rest of society aside from the utility that they represent. They, in return, care little so long as they are allowed an environment conducive to their studies. Things will remain as they are as long as they hold value to the Empire, but I feel that this sort of relationship is unhealthy. You make them sound like some sort of cabal. Lady Freyan laughed lightly. Yes, that is what they're sometimes referred to as. The next closest thing to an Eldritch cabal. If certain breakthroughs are made, this may very well end up being close to the truth. At the mention of the undead casters, Ludmilla became aware of many shadows in her negative energy perception. They were somewhere below, most likely in some sort of basement. So, Leanne said, about Lord Frost. Are you bringing him into House Gushment? Yes, I'd like to know as well, Florine said. You seem wonderful together. Lady Freyan's steps slowed. A resigned smile played over her lips. That is the plan, yes, she said. He is a prominent member of the ministry and a fourth-tier arcane caster. The imperial dynasty has few magic casters, so I believe that creating a branch of casters for House Gushment would be a wise move. His imperial majesty granting titles to the master's disciples also means that our union would bring another fief under the influence of the imperial house. In all, the benefits are quite attractive. And you like each other, Florine added. Yes, that is a nice bonus. But they say that a duke's daughter can fall in and out of love according to the needs of her family. To be honest, I do not think they're wrong. Well, that's how it is for all of us, Leanne said. In your case, everything lines up nicely, so you may as well be happy about it. I imagine there should be opposition to this, Clara said. Or is the situation in the Empire such that the leverage you represent is unnecessary? In my estimation, Lady Freyan said, there is currently no house or faction in the Empire strong enough to outweigh the benefits that a union with Lord Frost will bring. His Imperial Majesty's ongoing actions play a large part in this, but I suppose I am also personally invested. I want to prove that my notions about Imperial Arcanists are correct by raising them for the Imperial dynasty. There's just the matter of getting past my father and the rest of the old guard who think that I should still be strategically deployed according to past standards despite present realities. Even in my position, or especially because of my position, I must accede to the will of the dynasty. Ludmilla could go and beat them up for you, Leanne offered. I am not going to beat up a duke. Laughter echoed through the corridors of the Imperial Ministry of Magic. Dimir turned and raised a hand, walking backwards in front of Ludmilla. Oh. I've been curious for a while now, how strong are you, exactly? Even the Royal Earth Guard scouts are stumped. That's a good question, Ludmilla replied. I haven't done any real fighting since returning from the Katsa Plains. Don't let her fool you with that humility of hers, Leanne said. She's killed so many things since the spring that you may as well write a story about her. Dimir sidled over to Leanne, adjusting her glasses with a hungry look. Tell me more. Well, after the annexation, Moman himself went to get her from the border. When he approached her capital, she ran out and challenged both members of Darkness with a rusty spear. What? Aha. How crazy is that? Leanne struck a pose that didn't look much like someone wielding a spear. Ludmilla leaned forward and frowned across at them. Who told you about that? Moman did. Anyway, after that, she rode over to Facet County. It's not there anymore. Then, over the summer, she destroyed an army of over 100,000 goblins, hobgoblins, bugbears and some other things. At the end of summer, she climbed up into the highest valleys of the Azalizia Mountains, The frost giant tribes were subjugated within days. Just before the autumn harvest, she hopped onto her ship and sailed up and down the Katza Plains, destroying hundreds of thousands of undead along the way. Deep in its darkest depths, she faced off against 6 elder liches, at once. It was 5. And I didn't ask for it, they were being unreasonable. See? She won't even deny that it happened, Zaradnik never lies. That's why she usually doesn't say much. Whenever she talks it's like a spear comes out of her mouth and sticks you in the gut because the truth hurts. All things considered, I think she can beat up a duke. Don't let anyone know about any of this though, or you might find her waiting under your bed with her pet dragon. Dimir looked at Ludmilla and swallowed. She turned back around and slid into place on the opposite side of their entourage. Please go easy on General Carbane and General Gregan, Lady Zaradnik, Lady Freyan said after a long silence. They're good, loyal men. They caught up with Lord Frost in the west wing of the Imperial Ministry of Magic, where he stopped at each door to knock several times. Apologies, my ladies. He turned to lower his head as they approached, but this is how tours tend to go in the Ministry of Magic. Unless they're considered a recognized peer in the field or someone who represents a sizable grant, everyone would rather avoid spending time entertaining visitors. You could say that we're inherently resistant to the majority of conventional espionage attempts because of this. Ludmilla studied the plain oak door and the bleak stone walls on either side. There was no indication as to what the chamber within contained. She could hear someone flipping pages inside, so it appeared that they were being ignored as Lord Frost had suggested. What's the usual process through which grants are made? Clara asked. In the distant past, Lord Frost answered, the ministry was a think tank that could be employed by anyone to perform research and development in arcane fields. Like the Imperial Army, however, it was turned into a major national institution. As with the military, the emperors of old were quick to realize the value and acted to place us increasingly under their control. This was roughly around the same time that the original school that eventually became the academy was founded by the master. In fact, I think the school was founded because the institute of the time needed a way to raise new generations of arcane casters. So the way that the Empire raises arcane casters employs an institutional framework similar to how the temples of the 6 raise acolytes, Clara said. Do the temples of the 4 also do this? The magical potential has historically been rare, so how has competition for prospective students been managed in the Empire if so? Lord Frost furrowed his brow at Clara's line of questioning, his gaze unfocusing for several moments. Ah, he nodded to himself. I believe that you have been subjected to a misconception. We dispelled this bit of common sense a century ago, but I suppose that these matters are not something most have any awareness of. The potential for arcane magic is unassociated with the potential for, rather than divine magic, it would be more accurately described as a tier magic discipline fueled by conviction. This type of knowledge does not transmit very well since the temples consider it taboo to explore the nuances of what they consider powers bestowed by the gods. As such, those under their influence tend to remain ignorant of reality. So the educational models of nations with high degrees of religious influence like the Slain Theocracy and the Holy Kingdom of Roble are fundamentally flawed? Fundamentally, no. It is more that its application in certain areas is, in error. This error is deeply ingrained in their culture, to the point where it is treated as common knowledge and not given much thought as you have just demonstrated. Since the 2 nations you mentioned are dominated by temple curriculums, a failure to realize the potential for divine magic is misinterpreted as not having potential for any magic. This results in these nations having disproportionate ratios of different types of magic casters. And, as a result, derivative industries and the benefits that they bring to society are never realized. The grey-robed wizard turned an appraising look upon Clara. Very good, Lady Corlin, he said. It is quite gratifying to enter into discourse with an aristocrat who has a mind for intricacies beyond politics, intrigue, and the accumulation of personal wealth and power. Even with the Imperial Magic Academy raising generations of the Empire's future leadership, it is quite rare to find someone of your caliber in the Empire. I often wish that I could force obstinate aristocrats and bureaucrats into making the right decisions. Perhaps our new suzerain will end up doing it for us? All things in good time, Lord Frost, Clara replied. Implementing radical change comes with its own pitfalls, as well, though I am surprised that the Empire is having problems of this nature. Yes, well, No matter how much progress we make, I suppose some things never change. In the case of the Empire, there are certain dynamics in particular that make things prickly. The wizard and his apprentice continued down the hall. He gestured loosely for them to follow. As a scholar, he said, I am of the mind that all avenues of study should be explored to their fullest potential. Scholars, unfortunately, are rarely heeded unless those in power are desperately grasping for answers. That, or we can bring them wealth somehow. This is why patrons offer research grants, is it not? Clara said, there must be a middle ground somewhere. Resources are limited, so practical developments will garner the most investment. It is the solution and the problem at the same time. Since we are a formal institution of the Empire, everything must go through the imperial bureaucracy. A wealthy patron cannot simply appear and shower us with support. Their support must be approved by the powers that be. Furthermore, the majority of the ministry is tied up with government projects. We are allocated a budget and only a small amount is set aside for theoretical research, which the administration sees as frivolous. Lord Frost knocked on the next door. He waited for half a minute before knocking again. A muffled voice issued from the other side. Fuck off. Lady Freyan pressed the tips of her fingers to her forehead. Does this happen to everyone? Ludmilla asked. Well, it isn't as if they can see through walls, Lord Frost answered with a shrug. Even the Emperor himself is subjected to irate reactions if there hasn't been enough time to properly notify everyone of a visit. The doors tend to be magically locked, as well. More discreet individuals might put up warning signs about dangerous experiments or crucial points in research to ward people off. The alchemists and artificers in Warden's Vale never did that. Maybe it was because they were merchants rather than scholars. Lord Frost led them further on. Now, where was I? Because the Empire holds the purse strings, branching out as we please is difficult. Since the Empire considers the Imperial Ministry of Magic's efforts critical to the nation, it is more often than not that the fruits of our research are monopolized by the Empire. Near everything is secret, top secret, protected or magically patented. Ludmilla recalled Jermaine Linez's incident. Does magically patented involve explosions? Why, yes, it does, Lord Frost nodded. Items that we expect to stay within the Empire's borders, equipment for the Imperial Army or some other branch of the government, for instance, will inflict a magical brand upon those who tamper with them. Those who possess this brand are incarcerated upon detection. Exports of magical items patented by the Empire will explode if handled in the same fashion. This is to protect our technology, of course. And no one has taken issue with this. I'm sure that they might, but attempts at theft should be duly punished, yes? Magical technology is a key factor in the power of any nation. We are simply defending our interests. This brings us back to the original topic. Since the Empire is a secular state, the influence of the temples is seen as undesirable. At the same time, the temples are crucial to the well-being of the nation, so we cannot simply discard them. They are rivals for influence in the Empire, Lady Freyan said. Even with absolute political authority and military power, our government is all too aware that the temples can influence the population in undesirable ways should they oppose any of our policies or actions. Riestais was a secular monarchy, but Ludmilla didn't know whether it had the same issues with the temples of the Four. Their position being what it was, the temples of the Six focused entirely on the care of its congregation. Still, she was aware of the pressure that the temples could exert. Her debate with Bohadan over the evacuation of their village was an example of this. It was not conducted in the antagonistic manner that Lady Freyan intimated, however. So you curbed the influence of the temples by, what? Leanne asked, limiting the number of priests. Temple schools still exist, Lady Freyan said, but the faith of the Four has no official representation in the Imperial Academy of Magic. Nor does it have any in our universities aside from the military academy. I see. The Imperial Academy of Magic raised the Empire's leadership, the aristocrats, great talents and those possessed of substantial wealth. These students were raised in an institution that minimized the influence of religion. The segment of the population raised to become priests would be commoners and thus offer no political or economic advantages to the temple's base of power beyond themselves. A grey-robed figure came around the corner of the hallway, pacing rapidly in their direction. Lord Frost brightened. Ah, good, we've caught someone outside of their laboratory, Darius. We have some visitors from. Darius dashed towards them. He was a man of average build and height, but something about the way he looked in their direction was unsettling. Whoa! That's some crazy face if I ever saw it. I'll handle him. The shadow demon settled back down. Dareth's arms came up and, just before he reached Clara, Ludmilla's arm shot out and she grabbed him by the throat. Lifting the frenzied man from the ground, she hurled him into an open door nearby. Seeing that every other door was closed, the room was probably his. The man didn't even finish skidding over the floor before he leapt back onto his feet. As he ran back towards the entrance, Ludmilla slammed the door in his face, holding it shut. Frantic pounding issued through from the other side. "Let me out," Dareth pleaded. "Let me touch. I promise I won't lick." Lord Frost's voice came from behind her. "I was hoping it would play out better than that." "Who is he?" Florine asked. "Dareth is one of our lead artificers. Nearly all of his work is for the Imperial Army. He wears equipment that allows him to examine magical items and equipment, so I thought that he would notice and engage in a bit of friendly conversation." Thumping filled the air as Dareth banged on the door again. "Was he crying?" "This is too friendly," Ludmilla said. "Is there no in-between?" "When it comes to our respective fields of study," Lord Frost replied, "this is well within the realm of expected behavior." The sight was far too stimulating, I'm afraid. "What's your field of study?" Leanne asked. "Necromancy," he answered. Lord Frost locked the door with a spell. Ludmilla shifted away, trying not to eye him warily. "Should I tell him?" "Don't you dare." "Wait a minute," Leanne frowned as they walked away. "If he's a necromancer, then why is Frianne scared of death bread?" "What is death bread?" "Just because we're like that," Lady Frianne said, "doesn't mean I have to like everything he likes." "Hello? What is death bread?" Leanne stepped up to squeeze in between Lord Frost and Norman. Lady Frianne stepped up to walk on the other side of Lord Frost. He, have I got a treat for you," Leanne said in conspiratorial tones. She reached into her infinite haversack and pulled out a magical container. The aroma of fresh bread and fruity pastries wafted into the air as she lifted the cover. "Made with produce straight from the Sorceress Kingdom," Leanne told him. "Undead labor is involved in 80% of the supply chain. It'd be more, but the Empire side of things would scream." "Really now?" Lord Frost leaned in closer to Leanne, bending forward to examine her goods. Lady Frianne grabbed his elbow and yanked him back. "Not gonna try?" Leanne tempted him with a smile. "May I?" He picked out a cream puff laced in caramel, taking an experimental bite. This is quite delectable. 80%, you say?" "Between harvest, transport and processing," Leanne replied. "Farmers manage teams of undead. Soul Eaters represent the majority of the domestic transport in our territories, while undead also power the machinery involved in processing. Oh, the salt is conjured by elder liches, if that counts." "Elder liches, you say? That's an avenue of production I haven't considered, though admittedly employing an elder lich in the Empire would be next to impossible. Summoned skeleton mages only appear to be capable of casting combat-related spells." This is quite, dear, you must try one of these." Lady Frianne glowered down at the cream puff in Lord Frost's hand before relenting with a sigh. "I win. If Frianne puts a curse on you, I'm going to ask Lady Sholtier to leave it on." "We've been experimenting with undead labor in agriculture for some years now," Lord Frost said. "Within the Ministry, of course. None of the members involved in the research of decent cooking skills, so all we could produce were these pitiful biscuits that Frianne kept turning her nose up at. So your common folk have no qualms about consuming these products?" "In our territories, no," Leanne replied. "The city has no problems either, but things get iffy out to the west. Demi-human subjects don't really care one way or the other, and we're exporting all sorts of stuff to the Dwarf Kingdom with zero issues. We're starting to promote our exports in the Empire, but I'm sure you know how it is." "Indeed. So this death bread, where is it located?" "Out in the southern fourth-class districts." "Ah, I see. So your hope is that pragmatism will win out over superstition?" "Yepers." Well, I should drop by on occasion to see how it's doing. Acclimation to the presence of undead labor and its products is a topic of great interest to me." Ludmilla's attention wandered as they passed directly over the cluster of negative energy presences. They were deep below the Imperial Ministry of Magic, perhaps 100 meters underground. Considering the average Imperial citizen's reaction to the undead, Ludmilla said, I take it that these experiments you've been conducting are hidden somewhere on these grounds?
Yes, that's right. I would love to show you our work, but it is a restricted area.
Considering where you hail from, it hardly seems to be an issue, but the rules are the rules. We're currently on our 5th year of monitoring. At least someone followed the rules. The negative energy presences receded as they made their way around the corner and down the next hallway. What are you monitoring, exactly? Ludmilla asked. There are certain fears expressed by certain respectable organizations and individuals over the possibility that undead summoned through tier magic-related processes might result in the accumulation of negative energy. This accumulation may, in turn, result in the manifestation of natural undead, or so they claim.
This is certainly not the case, Ludmilla said.
We have thousands of undead laborers all over the Sorceress Kingdom with no sign of increased negative energy accumulation.
Lord Frost stopped to take a deep breath.
He let out a long sigh. It is as I mentioned earlier, scholars are rarely heeded. All we can do is collect data to build our case. In the meantime, superstition impedes progress. He turned to regard them with an approving gaze. I must apologize for my hasty judgment upon our meeting.
Lord Frost lowered his head.
You ladies are far more than you appear. In the blink of an eye, you have transformed from signs of the ignorant reisties to champions of progress. I suspect that your industries will surpass the entire region's production in short order. The Empire could have been reaping the benefits of undead labor for generations. Instead, a nascent nation has stolen the lead in a matter of months. The grey-robed man turned towards a nearby door with a sad shake of his head. He knocked on the door several times. Huh? What do you want? It's me, Sophie. Frian is here with the visitors that she spoke of. The sound of someone moving around on the other side of the door went on as the minutes passed. It came closer, then fell away, punctuated by the sound of weighty objects being shifted over the floor. Sophie? Lady Frian's voice rose uncertainly. Just a minute. Where the hell did it? Baroness Noyer's voice faded away again, replaced by more rummaging. Maybe she's hiding her mess, Leanne offered. She doesn't care if others see her messes, Lord Frost said. If I were to wager a guess. A shadow appeared at the door. Clara gasped and scurried back as a thick black tentacle slithered out from under it. Ludmilla frowned as it probed its way closer to her. Is this Baroness Noyer? She asked. No. Lady Frian stepped halfway back to the opposite wall. It's probably the reason why she's been looking around her laboratory. Leanne, Florian and Lord Frost shifted back to join Clara and Lady Frian in the hall. Ludmilla knelt and extended a hand towards the tentacle. A squeamish noise sounded from behind Ludmilla as the tentacle found her fingers and oozed over them. She rose again after collecting the slime in her palms. Are you all right? Lady Frian asked. It's just a slime, black ones are very rare. Ludmilla smiled as she held it out to them. They all took 2 steps back. You know, Leanne said. Most people put on that face when they're talking about cute and cuddly animals. Slimes are cute and cuddly. Clara's cheek twitched. Lord Frost came forward again, giving Ludmilla a wide berth. Sophie? I think we've found what you're looking for. Another shadow appeared at the door. This time, it opened. A buxom woman stood in the doorway, dressed in a long white coat. The coat hung open, revealing an open-topped white blouse and tulip skirt. A wide belt with a row of loops for alchemical vials and tools encircled her waist. Locks of purple hair came down to her jaw, framing a face that was pale and fair, save for a discolored scar covering its left side. Sophie's eyes, one red and one pink, fell upon the slime in her hands. Gustav, she scolded the slime, you can't just run off like that. Gustav displayed no reaction to the woman's words, content to remain docile in Ludmilla's hands. Sophie looked back up at her, adjusting the golden monocle over her left eye. You're a ranger? She asked. I am, Ludmilla answered. That'd explain a lot. Looking for work? I'll pay you 40 imperial gold coins per year, that includes a cottage on my land. Where's your land? Just 2 days south of the city. From what she had heard, a small family could get by on 3 gold per month in our winter. The cost of a decent living in rural areas was roughly a third of that, so the offer of 40 gold per year would provide a luxurious lifestyle for a provincial family.
Your offer seems attractive for a forester, Ludmilla said. How is it that the position hasn't been filled yet?
Well, because it isn't a position for a forester. I'm looking for rangers to help out with my latest and greatest project.
Baroness Noyer turned and strode back into her room, her white coat flowing behind her. They followed her in, finding not a laboratory filled with strange experiments, but a space filled with glass terrariums. Each contained a miniature environment housing 1 or 2 slimes of various types. Roughly halfway through the room, Baroness Noyer turned and pointed at an empty terrarium.
Gustav goes in there, she said. Does Gustav escape often? Ludmilla asked as she coaxed the black slime back into its home. It's usually well behaved. I just fed Gustav its weekly bunya, so it probably wasn't hungry. Maybe it came out to greet you? At the other end of the room, they joined Baroness Noyer at a large stone table under bright magical lighting. Several maps were spread out over one end while books, stationery and models of unknown design occupied the rest. What looked like a bedroll and several pillows were stuffed underneath. Baroness Noyer took a spot on the far side. A surprised look filled her expression as she turned to face them, and her monocle glinted in the light as adjusted it.
Frian, Willem, what are you two doing here?
We've been here all along, Lady Frian told her. The party we've brought with us is the group that I mentioned is visiting from the Sorceress Kingdom. My ladies, this is Baroness Sophia Noyer, one of the senior fellows of the Imperial Ministry of Magic and an arcane caster of the 4th tier. She is a monster researcher who is currently focusing her efforts on slimes. Baroness Noyer, this is Countess Clara Corlin, Countess Leanne Wagner, Baroness Ludmilla Zaradnik, and Baroness Florine Gunye.
Baroness Noyer looked at Ludmilla.
So you're not a ranger?
I'm still a ranger, Ludmilla replied.
I see. What do you think of my offer, then?
Sophie.
Along another edge of the rectangular table, Lady Frian crossed her arms. Unfortunately, Ludmilla said, my duties preclude me from taking you up on your offer. I'm still very much interested in what you wanted rangers for, however. Really?
Baroness Noyer frowned. That's strange. Usually, nobles plug their noses and run away.
That's because you keep trying to give them live demonstrations. A sour look came over Lady Frian's expression. Since Baroness Zaradnik appears to be familiar with slimes, I think you can skip the preamble. What about the others? The demonstration doesn't take long, just gotta get one of those knights outside to crawl into the sewers and fill a bucket or 2. Beside Ludmilla, Clara, Leanne and Florine vehemently shook their heads.
No?
Darn, the researcher pouted. In that case, I hope you can follow my presentation. Baroness Noyer started moving things off of the table, pulling one of the maps to the center. It appeared to depict the northern third of the large lake south of our winter. When Master Paradine retired from the forefront of the ministry, His Imperial Majesty divided his lands between his disciples. Instead of taking one of the fancy places with established industries, I requested this territory from the Emperor. Ludmilla studied the map. The river flowing into the lake branched into a vast expanse of wetlands stretching out from the northern shore of the lake. It was mentioned your new fief was a large, yet undesirable piece of crown land. That's right. Baroness Noyer nodded. This area is known by the locals as our winter's asshole. Lady Frian cleared her throat loudly. Baroness Noyer grinned, seemingly finding her interruption amusing. It's the terminus of our winter's sewer system, Lady Frian told them. A wide delta forms out of the river that carries the city's waste away. You can probably imagine why the land is considered undesirable. I can imagine why they think it's undesirable, Ludmilla said. In reality, it should bring a vast amount of wealth to these wetlands. Nature does not turn up its nose at such a steady stream of resources. Baroness Noyer let out a low whistle. Wow, she got it right away. Maybe you really are a ranger. Most of our martial nobles are cavalry types. Conventional cavalry does not do well in my territory's terrain. Our house and my people have always been rangers. The slime researcher nodded slowly as she fingered a lock of loose hair. I think I know why you're so interested now. You're trying to see if you can apply what I'm doing to your territory using rangers from your population. If I can find a way to make it work, Ludmilla replied. I understand that much of the research in the Imperial Ministry of Magic is treated as a national secret. Will that be a problem? Ah, you're a noble of the Sorceress Kingdom, aren't you? Baroness Noyer gave her an odd look. You could ask me what color my panties are and I'd be legally obligated to tell you. They're black, just in case you're wondering. Lord Frost nodded sagely. Lady Freyan pinched his arm. We're not here in an official capacity, Ludmilla said, but Lady Freyan has been kind enough to show us around the Imperial capital. If it's something confidential, I won't press the matter. It is and it isn't, Baroness Noyer told her. All research funded by the Ministry's budget is technically the property of the Empire, but my work isn't exactly behind closed doors. Anyone could scry it or fly over my territory to see what's going on. Furthermore, the proof of concept is being conducted on my land and paid out of pocket. If members of the Imperial Ministry of Magic are being infiefed, won't it cause conflicts of interest? You now have domain revenues that can be allocated towards independent research. Everyone looked over at Clara as she voiced her question. It did seem like a reversal of the Empire's apparent efforts to monopolize its talent and direct the effort of its institutions and their members. It's technically always been like that, Baroness Noyer said. These lands that we've been granted were formerly Master Peradine's lands. Instead of the Master using the revenues for his personal research, we all have a bit of funding for our little projects now. Except you purposely took this fief, Leanne pointed out. It looks like there are 2 or 3 villages on the outskirts, but 90% of it is the wetlands on the northern shore of the lake. Ah, Baroness Noyer raised a finger, but that's the beauty of it. These few villages are more than enough for me to do what I want to, and this land is exactly what I need to do it. Baroness Noyer reached out to grab a roll of paper, unfurling it over the table to reveal a schematic. They leaned forward to examine the diagrams laid out before them. I understand why Freyan says you'll be interested in what we have to offer now, Leanne said, but will this work? What do you think, Baroness Saradnik? Baroness Noyer asked. The schematic was easy enough to understand, even for Ludmilla. The systems represented had various inputs, but instead of complex processes that only artisans and sages could decipher, remarkably straightforward solutions were being employed. This is amazing, Baroness Noyer, Ludmilla said. It is extraordinarily simple and efficient, provided you have the right slimes. Baroness Noyer offered her a broad grin in response, sweeping an arm out to gesture to the rows of terrariums behind them. Many different species of slimes existed in the world. The slimes that Ludmilla was familiar with were forest and wetland-dwelling slimes that fed on detritus and carrion. Further out from the original bounds of Warden's Vale, species that hunted live prey also existed. While a few of the slimes that inhabited the sewage systems of cities were seen as beneficial, there were exotic ones with more specialized diets that were exterminated as pests if they were discovered. Baroness Noyer proposed to channel the effluent of our winter into basins similar to salt pans. There, different types of slimes would be used to isolate all manner of useful materials mixed into what the city considered waste. With our winter continuing to grow as the Empire did, its sewer system would be overloaded and Baroness Noyer's operation would be there to reap the benefits. Common slimes like the ones found in forests, marshes and sewers would multiply rapidly and the excess populations would be processed into fertilizer. The more exotic ones that ate different types of minerals would also be raised and processed for their content, albeit at a significantly slower rate. Herds of different slimes would be rotated through the pans in an order where everything was separated through consumption and harvested as they multiplied. It was a technique that could be easily replicated. With sufficient volume and proper containment measures, a major new industry could be developed. So this is a slime ranch? Florine asked. I prefer to call it a slime finery, Baroness Noyer answered. Slimes have coexisted with humanity for as long as we can remember. We use them as a convenient way to dispose of our waste, but I find it strange that we haven't harnessed their true strengths. It's time to take our relationship to the next level. Every slime is a natural alchemical laboratory capable of refining specific materials with unsurpassed efficiency. By embracing the efficiency of slimes, we improve the efficiency of our civilization and boost the quality of life for everyone. Since the sewer system of a city belongs to whoever owns the city, Leanne said, aren't you afraid they might cut you off and monopolize these operations? This is potentially a huge source of revenue for local governments. At worst, it'll help pay for infrastructure maintenance. That would be disappointing if it happened too quickly, Baroness Noyer admitted, but it'll probably take time for governments to embrace the concept. Also, there are types of slimes you don't want in a city, like the ones that heat iron and precious metals, so these facilities are best kept separate from places where those slimes can wreak havoc. Properly implementing everything would take years. What you suggest will most likely happen anywhere that the idea is being put to work, but I have plenty of other things to pioneer. I'll be happy if my work spreads and I've made enough to fund my other research. I see, Leanne straightened from looking at the schematic. In that case, we'll be more than happy to provide you with some equipment and labor that you'll find indispensable for your work. You'll also be notified of up-and-coming technologies we'll be rolling out for industrial use. In exchange, we'd like access to the data derived not only from the operation of your slime finery, but any new research that you embark upon in the future. Purchasing rights for the breeds of slime that you use would be great as well. Was that acceptable? Ludmilla felt that Leanne was essentially asking for everything. To her surprise, Baroness Noyer's answer was immediate. Deal. She leaned over the table and stuck out her hand. I look forward to our collaboration.